Friends, as you heard from the scriptures, our focus today is on shepherds. You know, the prophet Jeremiah speaks about bad guys who were not good in doing their job. They were terrible guys, who didn't care for the flock. They cared for themselves. Well, even today it continues. There are some who are not invested in caring for people. But Jesus comes to reaffirm the fact that he himself is going to be our shepherd. Well, the psalm speaks beautifully of God being our shepherd. You have heard this psalm several times over, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. And one of the verses there, 23:5, speaks of this beautiful concept. You spread a table before me in the eyes of my foes, and you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Imagine cup overflowing. At baptism, we have been anointed, and since then we have become partners with Christ, sharing in his priesthood, prophetic role, and kingly role. And we have been filled with all these gifts of the Holy Spirit. But then our hearts flow, or our cups can overflow with something else. So the question for us today is, with what does your cup overflow? Does it overflow with anger, hatred, animosity, frustration, disappointment, anxiety? Or does it overflow with kindness, mercy, and love, compassion, forgiveness, as all of us are called to? So the question for us today is to reflect on this concept of, are my cup overflowing with what we have inside? So what do we have inside the cup? There was a guy who had a cup of coffee in his hands, and he was walking by, and another guy came and bumped him, and therefore he spilled his coffee. So when asked why did he spill the coffee, he said, of course, I spilled it because this guy bumped into my cup. Well, supposing he had tea in his coffee, he would have spilled tea. Because he had coffee in his cup, he spilled coffee. Obviously, right? So if you have hatred in your cup, only hatred will spill forth. And if you have love, compassion, and mercy that God invites us in the person of Christ, then no matter how hard our road is, no matter how rattled we are with life, we will always be spilling forth love, compassion, forgiveness, and understanding. Right? So whatever happens in our lives, you will always spill forth goodness. Like Tobit in the Old Testament. You heard of his story, right? He had been a faithful Jew who always went to the temple in Jerusalem, worshiped God, but he had to flee his country to Nineveh. And there he was still continuing to do good works, but he became blind, and several things happened in his life. He had to send his son away to get the money he had loaned to someone, and several things happened in his life. All the time, the words that came out of his mouth were, "Blessed be God. Blessed be God." Just like Job. Job was put to test several times. He had so much wealth, but down the line he lost everything, including his children dying, and his wife is cursing him. Why don't you curse God and die? But in all that, the words that came out of the mouth of Job was, "I know my Redeemer lives." Right? Beautiful words. Mother Teresa, for example. Mother Teresa was, she began to start her congregation, and she lived in a poor setting. She had children with her. One day, it so happened that there was no food to eat. So she had to call the children around and say, "Today we have no food. Maybe we will go and pray. God will provide for us." So she took the children, prayed in the chapel. After 10 minutes or so, she said, okay, now let's go out. We have to beg for food. We don't have food. God will provide. So she took the children around, and she herself went and begged for food to one of the bakers around the corner. And the baker hated her with all his heart. And when she put out her hands, please give something for the children to eat, he spat on her. And she gently wiped the spittle with her sari and asked her, again, put forth her hand and said, thank you, that was for me. Can you give some food for the children? Right? Seeing the humility of this nun, the man was converted. He said, okay, herefore, I will be providing for you. With what does your cup overflow? All right? So think of that as you go forth doing your chores this week. But I'm here for a mission. My mission is to speak about the sisters congregation called Franciscan Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is a special congregation founded by a French priest who was a missionary in South India in a diocese called Pondicherry. In 1844, the diocese convened a synod, and in that synod they discussed about how to improve the plight of women. In those days, women were treated very badly. They were second-class citizens. They had no right. They had no education. They could not work and so on. So the diocese recommended that Father Dupuy should start a congregation, indigenous women's congregation, for the sole purpose of educating and empowering women. And so the same year, he began that congregation with the help of one Carmelite nun and 3 novices. They came together and began this process. The very next day, he started a school for children, especially girls. And by this time, that school has got about 6,000 girls from K through 12. Amazing growth. But then the sisters grew in number. There are about 1,000 of them today in 178 convents, working in about 9 countries. God has blessed them so much, and through them, so much of development has happened. Girl children have been to school, which otherwise they would have been deprived of Catholic education. I'm also particularly focusing on one of their mission, which is founded in my village where I grew up. I went to the school run by the nuns, K through 5th grade. They have started a boarding school. The boarding is meant for children from far-off villages, remote villages where they have no access, where the parents are not well off. They have to go and seek jobs in neighboring states, far off. So they would bring the children and put them in the boarding so that the children could look after them and send them to Catholic schools. Meanwhile, these parents would come and visit them only once in 6 months or so. And there are also destitute children in the same boarding who are parentless. Mothers or fathers have died, or they are under the care of the grandparents who themselves are very poor and sick. And so they would bring them to the nuns here and keep them there so that the children get education and at least some food to eat and protection. So I'm here, my dear friends, appealing for your consideration and generosity to help these nuns whose main goal is to empower women, especially through education and social work and health care and so on. I have personally witnessed their marvelous works. I have been a recipient of their kindness. So I'm appealing to you for your generosity. Anything you might give will go a long way to help them. $20, $50, $100, whatever you could give will help in providing food, basically, for the children and also education. So please consider in your generosity, and please keep remembering, with what does your cup is filled with. What do you have in your cup? Is it generosity, love, compassion, and kindness? Or these days it's very easy to knock somebody and you get all that you get out is dirt, right? We are not like that, right? We are filled with God's grace. We have been empowered by the Spirit of the Lord to bring goodness to the world. So as you go forth, just remember, just for your information, if you write out a check, please write it in the name of the parish. In the memo section, you can write India Mission, and then put it in the basket. At the end, there will be a special collection as you go out. There are special baskets. Please put them in. If you didn't bring check or money, next week or in the next several weeks, you can bring them and offer them in favor of the sisters and their work. God bless you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your generosity. May God richly bless each and every one of you. Thank you.